Hello and welcome to Video Game Hangover. I'm Randy Dickinson and I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hello, I'm DJ Ross. I'm in Mountain View, California.
Each week on Video Game Hangover, we talk about the games that have been keeping us up at night. This week, we're kicking off the summer Backlog Attack with Wolfenstein 3D and Resident Evil Biohazard. Plus, I bumped Venba from last week. I promise I'm going to talk about it this week. I'm going to start with it this week.
Oh, okay.
We're going to do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to wait a
Indian
month to try to remember it after the Backlog Attack. So we're going to do all of it. All of these things this week.
All right.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking, I was wondering if you're going to start with Dragon Quest 1. And then I realized between that and Wolfenstein, that would probably make it I don't know how to say this, not the oldest episode, but probably collectively the two oldest games we had talked about in the same week on one show.
The oldest content, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, you throw me a curveball with this Resident Evil.
Which, is that the newest game? It's not the newest game on my list either. So no, I don't. Nope. Just a normal old episode.
All right. It all balances out.
Yeah. I'm trying to sort of space it out. So I have, because Resident Evil and Spider-Man both require me to be in my house in front of my PlayStation. Whereas Dragon Quest and Persona require, not require, but are more portable and easier to sort of travel with. I had very little going on this weekend. I thought that was the perfect weekend to get some quality time in with the grossness of Resident Evil Biohazard.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to play that one outside the house either. Probably wouldn't help the atmosphere too much.
Yeah, no, I was like, the sun is shining. It's a beautiful summer day. Let's play a super scary, slimy, grody Resident Evil game.
Although that was sort of the premise for Resident Evil 5 at one point. It was like, oh yeah, we're going to Africa. It's going to be all bright. How can you do horror in this sort of bright and outdoor atmosphere? It's going to be real different. Yeah. And I don't know how well they delivered on that, but it's definitely an interesting idea when they were still pitching it.
Yeah. I mean, that game is a shooter. It is really just a
yes, yeah,
third-person military shooter.
Maybe they'll give it another shot at some point to the outdoor horror thing. Well, but sounds like Resident Evil Village, not Village. Resident Evil Biohazard is not the attempt. No,
I should clarify that, because like last week I kept saying Resident Evil Village, but that's actually 8.
Yeah, you'll be playing that next week.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's next year's Backlog Attack. I do have that too. That is in the house as well. But no, I'm trying to sort of go in order here and wanted to play Biohazard first. I've heard that Biohazard and Village are somewhat connected, are actually more than somewhat, are pretty significantly connected. So
yeah.
Biohazard is the game that is on my Backlog Attack. Village is some other thing that we'll get to eventually.
Somebody else's backlog, maybe.
Right, exactly. Some other guy and some other podcast.
Yeah.
Man, it's been a little while. Are we jumping into it? Let's jump into it.
Yeah, let's jump into the Indian food.
Yeah, let's do Venba. This is a delightful little game that I played just a couple weeks ago now, actually. Just a fun, short, very personal narrative about Indian food, sort of tangentially about Indian food and how food plays an important role in the life of this family. So the narrative here is Venba is the matriarch of an Indian family. They've moved to somewhere in Canada, and they have a young son who grows up in Canada. And is sort of the son of an immigrant family, and the game sort of shows a little bit of the conflict that sort of comes with that, of being kind of the only kid with an immigrant family and an otherwise all white Canadian school, and wanting to have sort of an Americanized nickname, or I guess a Canadianized nickname.
Right.
And your family kind of holding on to family traditions and family food, and you really just wanting to kind of get past some of that stuff or get beyond some of that stuff and have what appears to be kind of a little more sanitized, a little more Easternized life, or Westernized, excuse me. So yeah, the game is a series of little vignettes that take place over time through the 80s and 90s of kind of a Cooking Mama mini game, essentially, where you get a little bit of story, some family interaction, some strife, and a big meal, which Venba hopes sort of brings everybody back together. The meals are sort of done as mini games where you have a series of kind of unusual ingredients, unusual to me, ingredients or unusual cooking implements and tools. And you have to sort of figure out how these things get pieced together to make hopefully an edible meal. So yeah,
how much
it's a bit of
guidance does it give you?
Not a ton. You have a cookbook that you're working off of that has been kind of handed down from another family member, but some of the pages are wet or greasy or have stains in them, or pages are ripped in half. So you have kind of the outline sometimes of recipes. As you get further into the game, you have less and less to work off of. But you use some of the tools and some of the ingredients that you've used in previous recipes, and you hopefully by the time you get to that point, you have a sense of how they kind of work together. So it's really really quite challenging for me, who has really only ever ordered Indian food from DoorDash before, to try to assemble these recipes. The game can be quite forgiving, though. Venba will say things like, "No, that doesn't seem quite right. I think this ingredient goes first." If you go way off path and try assembling something incorrectly. So there's not a lot of like time limits or any of the crazy chaotic pressure that sort of came with some of the Cooking Mama games. But it's Cooking Mama in the sense that you do have to sort of like do the right ingredients in the right order, kind of layered in the right way, to assemble something that hopefully looks and in the world of the video game smells delicious. So it's fun. It's more narrative than it is puzzle. But the puzzles are super engaging. I think almost kind of feel like you're really reconstructing a recipe that I could then copy out of the video game and take into my kitchen and probably assemble something that would be a passable version of the ingredients in the game or the recipe in the game. So it's surprisingly detailed. Yeah. And it is a cool way of creating these kind of memorable moments in the story of this family. It's it doesn't have a necessarily surprising outcome. It probably won't come as a huge surprise to anybody playing this that the son eventually grows up and wishes he had spent more time with his family and now has a new appreciation for Indian food and his heritage and stuff like that. But it is a nice story. It is certainly a perspective that doesn't come across often in video games. It's cool that it's not, another cooking game where you're making hamburgers or cookies or
right.
What was the one I played earlier this year? Lemon Cake, which was a bunch of baked goods. So yeah, I think it's a very different perspective and voice that I don't think I've ever heard in a video game before. So it was really neat to kind of learn things about kind of Indian culture and how each state in India has different versions of kind of the same recipes. So it is kind of one country with a lot of different cultures in it in a very similar way to the United States. So yeah, it was really, really interesting to kind of get all of this information within the backdrop of kind of a cute family, drama.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Do they teach you the difference between Northern Indian and Southern Indian food? Because that's something I can just never keep straight.
I don't know if it is that kind of overt in the game. And I apologize if I get any of this incorrect. So the family in the game, Venba's family, is from is Tamil, Tamil, which I believe is Southern India. So it is that culture's version of these recipes. I don't know that the game necessarily sort of spells out the differences between how those are different from Northern, but they do say at some point that, this one recipe has about 15 different versions depending on where you are or where you grew up or where your family's from in India.
Yeah, I'm sure it gets even more sort of like granular than just North and South, but that's always how I see it broken down. Or that's what I see most commonly anyway.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Are you going to attempt to make any of these things?
It was funny because as I was going through it, like I have a pretty small replica repertoire of things that I order when I go to Indian restaurants. And none of the things that I'm familiar with were recipes in the game. So I was like, maybe they're going to break out a chana masala or aloo gobi, and no. I don't know if those are particularly sort of Americanized versions of Indian foods, but these things were much more complicated and had a lot more layers to them. There was I tend to think that most Indian food is if not vegetarian, at least sort of plant-based. But there were recipes in here that included meat preparations and things like that too. So I don't necessarily think I would ever replicate that, but there were a few recipes in there that were like desserts. Or there was a thing called idlis, IDLI, that were little like puff pastries. I think I got the impression that sounded really good, that had different veggies and things inside of them. And I'm like, oh, is it like a samosa maybe? So they looked really, really good. And it required a cool cooking implement that made them. And there was frying involved. And I'm like, I like all of those things. Let's do all of that. So I'm curious, definitely. I'm not the most adventurous cook, but if I had a pretty good recipe, I could probably piece it together.
I'm very curious about the different cooking implements, because that's not something I really expected. I mean, I haven't done too many Indian dishes at home.
Yeah.
And the big obstacle with those has always been just tracking down some not weird, but some ingredient I don't commonly use, which is actually is not too bad because I live next to a pretty well-stocked Indian grocery store.
Oh, nice.
So it's always fun to travel over there and just be like, oh, here's this thing. And, while I'm here, I'll just get half a pound of cinnamon for 50 cents. That'd be great. But I didn't even consider that, maybe there are some like cooking implements that I'm just completely missing out on. I wonder if that is something that this could help me out with. I can't even imagine what those would be.
Yeah. There's two that I sort of come to mind briefly in the game that one was a series of platters that had kind of holes in them, and you had to sort of line up the holes in a very specific way so that the things that were on the lower levels of the platters would steam the things above them. So one of the first puzzles you had to kind of solve was sort of aligning the discs that had holes in them in a specific way so that the stuff on the bottom would steam the stuff on top. And I'm like, I've never seen that before. So
is that a real thing? I mean, that's just like a steamer basket that somebody cut holes into?
I presume so. And then there was a second one that was like a tiered preparation. And you had a device that would sort of keep everything kind of neatly stacked in columns. And it wasn't so much like, how do I use this thing, but like, what are the proper levels and layers so that the things, you don't end up with sort of raw vegetables in the middle of your stacked plate. So it was, it was, again, just elements of cooking that I've never explored before. Certainly using devices that I've never used. But all of it kind of going, that sounds really tasty. I would probably actually enjoy that. So, it was cool.
Huh. Well, I clearly have not been ambitious enough with my Indian cooking because I don't even own a tiered platter or whatever is going on. Huh.
It maybe isn't that fancy, but it was like, well, I don't. I'm like, how do I glue this thing together so that the levels all steam each other and I don't end up with raw food on top?
Yeah.
It was interesting. So this is cool. It's an interesting little experimental thing. It's beautiful art, really cool music. Venba always turns on the radio before she starts cooking, so you get like Indian pop music and stuff sometimes, just things that I don't run into in my normal life here in Pennsylvania. So that is kind of a cool little exploration of a culture that I don't get to spend enough time around. So the music is always kind of playing in the background while you're assembling these little puzzles and cooking games together. It feels like a very personal thing for the developers, trying to sort of tell this story and how it all comes together at the end. It's just really, really interesting, I think, to sort of have this perspective on someone's life in a video game and to sort of engage with it in this way through kind of light puzzle solving. I had a really, really good time with it. One of the things that I really like about it too is that it is kind of one of those really good, like, single sitting games. You can kind of get through the whole thing in about 2 to 2.5 hours. The puzzles can be pretty forgiving. So it doesn't put up a huge fight as you make your way through this story and cook up some really tasty food. I liked it a lot. Would definitely recommend it.
Cool. I like that food and cooking is sort of the entry point into like the greater story here, because I feel like food and like cooking games have been especially popular with sort of the rise in the like wholesome games lately. But I like that there's a little more going on than just it being a cooking game. Yeah, definitely. And my sort of experience with cooking games is things like Lemon Cake or Cooking Mama, where it's, or I think about the one in the Kirby game that came out last year, where you're running the little Kirby bakery, and you have to like, oh no, it's the lunch rush. You have to serve 50 Waddle Dees in 45 seconds or something like that. And it's always sort of very intense and very chaotic, and it's always about sort of trying to run this crazy big business and expand and make tons of money and be super popular. And that is not the approach to cooking in Venba. It is all about sort of heart and family and getting people together. And you're under pressure, obviously, because you're trying to solve a puzzle as a gamer, but it's not, there's no time limits or anything like that. And like I said, Venmo will pretty much prod you through most of the recipes as you kind of make goofy choices. So it feels much more relaxed and much more of a kind of a chill experience that I don't get from cooking games generally. So I appreciate that. They always feel like, you got to get your order up before the patrons get angry.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I want to check this out. I remembered as you started talking about it that I actually got this on the Switch last week, and I meant to play it before this week, but I was distracted by something else. So I'll get to it eventually.
Yeah, definitely. So it's on just about everything. It's on the Switch. I played it on Xbox. It's on Game Pass. So if you have Game Pass, you can play it as part of your subscription, which is really nice, which probably means that a lot more people will get a chance to check it out, which is awesome for these developers. So this is called Venba, Venba. Play it wherever you can find it.
Cool. Did they have a chai recipe by any chance?
No, I don't think so.
No. All right.
I don't remember any drink recipes actually in the game.
I'm really curious because last summer I ended up making chai like all the time, and I kept bouncing between several different recipes, and I don't know if I ever landed on one because every recipe I would look up is just slightly different, and I couldn't figure out like, okay, where's the balance? Where do I want it to be? So
you were kind of assembling your own like tea and spice blend to make.
Yeah, not
interesting.
Well, yeah, I suppose. But as a result, I'm just kind of always interested, like, oh, okay, so what is this person's chai recipe like? No longer really trying to find the one definitive one, but just trying new takes on it. So It's like, oh, what's the video game chai like?
That seems like one of those things that can be very regionalized, I imagine. Or even just sort of, very preference driven, where, like, oh, I only like my chai with, sugar in it or whatever. It's probably a very
exactly
specific taste thing, in the same way that maybe coffee is or tea is.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll probably still play it.
Yeah. I don't let that be a deal breaker for you.
I'll have to wait for the sequel where it's all chai all the time.
where Venba now is running a coffee house, and you've got lunch rush is coming, and
right next to I was thinking about Brewster or whoever the pigeon is in Animal Crossing. Exactly. It's like, don't mess up my chai order.
Or I might move out of the village and you'll cry for a week.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, cool.
Yeah. Now to the Backlog Attack.
Now to the backlog. How far back do you want to go? Do you want to do a little Wolfenstein? Oh, did I already say? We already said I'm playing Wolfenstein. Yeah, that's right.
We'll go right back to the very beginning. To the beginning of time itself.
Back to the very first video game. Well, it's not quite the first video game. Although, by many accounts, it is the first-person shooter. Although, it's sort of considered to be the, father of the genre, I suppose. But there are definitely other games that were sort of in this perspective and involved you shooting things. They just don't get quite as much recognition as this.
I always feel like Doom was the one that started it all, but does Wolfenstein 3D predate Doom?
Yeah, well, Doom basically came out as a follow-up to this.
Oh,
which
interesting.
is sort of the original mold, I suppose. Because Doom was also id Software. And I played my share of Doom over the years, but never made it all the way back to Wolfenstein 3D, so that's why I selected it for my list this year.
Oh.
And much to my surprise, it's surprisingly playable in 2023. It was maybe more, well, I was going to say maybe more playable than Quake, since I went back to that recently, but no, that's probably not true. It was definitely not the experience I was expecting, which would be, the first time I played Doom, I didn't even use a mouse with it. It was just, all keyboard. So that was very different if you think about how you control the first-person shooter these days. So I was expecting kind of that experience, just weird and clunky, and you can't really aim up and down. But lo and behold, I guess maybe it's just the version of Wolfenstein I was playing. I got this off of Steam. But it has mouse support now, so you can just look around.
Yeah.
You don't actually have to aim up and down, so it still is a little primitive in that respect. But no, you're not just confined to the keyboard, which I thought was kind of a relief compared to how I was expecting this to go.
But no pressure to get headshots.
No. In fact, there's a generous amount of auto-aim, because, it's still expecting you're playing this with a keyboard. You're not able to do the precision aiming that you are able to with a mouse. So I feel like because of that, it may have ended up being a little bit on the easy side. It may also have been because I immediately knocked it down one difficulty to easy. Just because, I feel like games were much more difficult back then. I had kind of a tough time getting through Quake when I played it a couple years ago. So I just thought, I want to see as much of this game as possible. I don't want to struggle through this experience from 1991, 1992. So I'm just going to knock it down one notch. And for the most part, it was fine. Just starting off, you are you play as BJ Blazkowicz, who has been captured by the Nazis in World War II, and he's being held in Castle Wolfenstein. And he has to escape. And that's basically the premise of the game. You just escape from this Nazi castle.
Sounds familiar. I think I've heard that story before.
Yeah.
I've certainly heard that name before.
Yeah, BJ Blazkowicz. It's kind of impressive how he is just, they've just stuck with that character in all the subsequent Wolfenstein games, even though they have become much more modern and kind of realistic looking. It's still just BJ with his, sculpted jawline.
And a spiky do.
Yeah, the old, I guess 1930s, 1940s haircut. Seems authentic. But anyway, so it's just this guy running around a castle shooting up Nazis. What else could you ask for? And I was going to say, much like other first-person shooters at the time, but there were no other first-person shooters at the time, so it takes place, all the levels are basically mazes. It looks like you're playing something like wizardry, or it's just the first person's perspective, very simple geometry. Everything kind of looks the same because there are only 3 or 4 different wall textures per area, so very, very simple, even compared to something like Doom. But it ends up feeling it's a little bit more of a maze exploration game than a shooter, especially compared to something like Doom. There are definitely enemies, but it's not like Doom where, you could walk into a room and just suddenly you're swarmed from all sides. Usually in Wolfenstein, you'll walk into a room and, there's one guard standing on the far side of the room. and maybe he's noticed you. Maybe you can sneak up on him and, stab him with your knife instead of shooting him. So a much less intense experience compared to the first-person shooters that immediately followed it.
So is the kind of the maze running a component of the I guess the challenge of the game? Is it possible to like find yourself in a dead end or anything like that, or is it pretty much you're just walking down hallways that are connected to other hallways?
The maze design is pretty simple. There are only a few sections where it actually truly felt like a really complicated maze, but it should be very familiar if somebody like if you're listening to this and you've played the original Doom or even Quake, where at some point you run into a locked door that you don't have the key for, so you have to backtrack and figure out where the key is, and then you have to find your way back to wherever the door was. And I found it much more manageable than Doom and Quake, because just the levels are much smaller in scope.
Gotcha.
And also there's this nice map overlay that you can bring up. I'm pretty sure Doom and even Quake had a map overlay, but this one just feels like cheating almost because the maps are so simple. I think the most contributing factor to whenever I got lost is just like everything looks so similar. There's very little visual difference between all the rooms, so unless you're really paying attention to sort of the layouts and like where exactly you shot that guard, so like wherever his dead body ended up, it becomes kind of difficult to keep track of like which exact room you were in. So I was very grateful to have that map there. Also, it's just very colorful, as somebody pointed out on stream, which I thought was funny because, yeah, it is very colorful. Like, everything is very, like, the floors are all bright blue, I think, and the walls are very, like, bright and saturated, especially compared to something like Doom and Quake, where they started to get very, like, creepy and dark. This was just, it's 1991, and they were still putting color into video games. They hadn't gotten the memo yet.
I mean, they only had a few colors to work with at that point.
That's true, yeah. It does go back quite far. But anyway, yeah, it's as far as the shooting experience went, I thought it was a lot of fun. Like I said, I started out on easy. It was surprisingly easy to just, like, to basically headshot guards, even though there's not really, like, headshots taking place. I found I could take out pretty much anybody with just one or two shots because the mouse made it very easy to just pinpoint aim. I tried going to keyboard aiming for a little bit just to see what that was like, and very quickly just decided, like, no, you know what? I'm just going to stick with the mouse for this. It's fine. I don't need that level of authenticity.
You don't need the full 1992 experience?
No. At one point, like after I had finished the first episode, because originally there were 3 episodes making it Wolfenstein 3D, I thought, okay, well, that was not too bad. I'll bump it up 1 to what I thought was normal mode, but I think it's actually, like, in the difficulty spectrum, it's maybe a little bit on the harder side. And I couldn't figure out if it's just the start of episode 2, you are confronted with a bunch of very difficult enemies at the start. But I could just not get past, like, I just kept hitting a wall after wall in episode 2, where these sort of like zombie/mutant enemies that the Nazis had been experimenting on were just so ferocious, or they would just do so much damage that I could just not make any more progress, and I don't really know what was going on. It felt like the enemies would actually do more damage to you the closer you got to them, which I thought was interesting. I don't know how much of that is a factor in sort of, more recent shooters.
Oh, interesting.
So I was really having a difficult time with it. I was just like, wow, episode 1 was such a cakewalk. Episode 2, I don't know what's going on anymore. I missed that sort of just like breezy atmosphere from episode 1. So I bumped it down. I bumped it back down to easy. And then the enemies were still just like I couldn't deal with it. So I bumped it down again to the difficulty mode where he's just wearing a little baby bonnet on the difficulty select screen. And I just played through the rest of the game like that. So that was a little humbling, but those enemies didn't give me any more problems after that.
Oh, interesting. So that's a weird kind of ramp up between episode 1 and episode 2. I wonder what the influence over that was.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what was going on. It's probably my fault at some point. But yeah, eventually I managed to make it through the entire thing. or at least the first 3 episodes, because I really wanted to, get to the end of episode 3, because spoiler, that's when you get to kill Hitler. So I did, and I feel like that was sort of put a cap on my Wolfenstein experience.
Nice. That's great. I mean, I've played some of the modern ones, obviously. I think the last probably 10 years or so. Similar to Doom, there has been kind of a series of modern Wolfenstein games, and they're fun. They're very breezy. They're similar to Doom. It's not a lot of like hiding behind cover and things like that. It's really just run and gun in a lot of ways. I think the Wolfenstein games, I tend to think of giant like automaton robots with Nazi armor on them and stuff like that. Yes. It's just goofy and eccentric. Killing a lot of Nazis, which is always super fun.
How are they like tonally? Like, are they kind of like, aside from the cyborg suits and everything, are they like silly? Because they look very serious.
Yeah, I think they're silly. They're very talky. Like the most recent one I remember playing, and this was a couple of years ago actually, on the Backlog Attack, is it was a co-op one, and you play as BJ's twin daughters, and the two of them are riffing to each other through the entire game. And I have a sort of vague recollection of thinking, okay, this is a little too much, you guys. you tone it down. But it's kind of a 2-person joke machine essentially. So it's cheeky. And your mileage may vary on whether or not you find that entertaining, but it definitely is done with a kind of a wink and a nod, I think.
Okay, interesting. I wasn't really sure what to make of it. So in this one, I feel like I don't know how much thought was sort of put into the tone of it at the time. On some level, it just feels like
we're video game developers thinking about tone in 1992. Yeah,
right. I mean, it feels like they were just doing whatever.
Right.
It ends up being very goofy, whether that's fully intentional or not. Like all the enemies, or a lot of the enemies, have these really over the top like German lines that they'll shout out as you're shooting at them. I think most famously, one of the guards, whenever you kill this type of guard, he just shouts out, "Mein Leben! Mein Leben!" Which, it was the first time I heard that, I was like, oh, that's where that's from. I should have known that it came from Wolfenstein. It's great. And then it just has like this whole... It feels very much like it was designed by sort of like 90s video game nerds. Like, whenever you kill one of the bosses... You kill them, and then their whole body explodes, and it's just like this gross sort of like pixelated corpse. And then it like rewinds and goes into the slow motion like death cam, where it just has like death cam flashing over the screen and just shows them exploding again. Like, okay, it's definitely a product of its time. So it feels like, maybe that was just an incidental thing. So that's why I was wondering if any of that had carried over into the more modern installments. And it sounds like, they've preserved a little bit of it, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I would say that's accurate.
Yeah. I had always pictured the modern ones as just like the super gritty, like World War II, or sort of like reimagined World War II, right? Sort of shooter.
Right.
Like, yeah, very serious.
And there's like an element of paranormal and like steampunk robots in it and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
yeah. There was a little bit of that going on in this also. Like, I knew there was the Hitler cyborg at some point, so I was expecting that. But then, like, there were the mutants, and then at one point, like the very first time, there's sort of the hint of Hitler appearing. He's like a wizard. So that I had never seen before. I was like, oh. I wasn't expecting it to go full sort of occult, like Doom and Quake, but I wasn't expecting the Hitler wizard. So that was surprising.
No one expects the Hitler wizard.
No one. Right. I mean, why would you? So overall, had a really good time coming back to this. Surprisingly playable in 2023, as I said. And it's on Steam. If you're really interested in old first-person shooters, I think you could do a lot worse. You certainly can't do much older. And there's actually a lot of stuff in here, too. So, correction from last week. So there's this other thing called Spear of Destiny, which I thought was a precursor to Wolfenstein 3D, but it's actually a prequel episode that came out after Wolfenstein 3D. So it's just a little bit confusing. And that actually is included with the Steam version. I don't know if I'll get around to playing it, but I kind of like that they just wrapped up all this Wolfenstein stuff into one place so you can check it out very easily.
Cool.
I think that's a wrap for Wolfenstein for now. Maybe at some point I'll go back and play the other episodes, but I feel like I got my fill of it. Shot a lot of Nazis.
How many episodes are there?
So there are 3 originally, and then they came out with 4, 5, and 6, which confusingly are also prequels to the original 3 episodes. And I think then they came out with Spear of Destiny, so there's like several sets of sequel episodes.
Oh, interesting.
Beyond that, I'm not sure if they did anything else before Doom, but they came out shortly after, like 92, 93. So very
all
quickly
within
got busy
kind of
with
that
that.
one timeline? Were these all dropped at once, or was this kind of an early experiment in episodic gaming?
No, I think they just did the episode 1, 2, and 3, and apparently they were so quick to develop they just moved immediately on to 4, 5, and 6. But they're
just cranking them out.
Brief. Yeah, like if you played Doom, that was divided up into episodes as well. So each one is basically a set of 9 or 10 stages.
Interesting.
Very consumable compared to some like modern shooters, especially.
It's weird that id needed 2 franchises to put these things into, right? It's sort of like the 2 pillars of id gaming is Wolfenstein and Doom at this point, and I feel like maybe this is sort of reductive, but there's some overlap, right? If they feel like kind of similar experiences,
A
with
little
slightly
bit, yeah.
different window dressing.
Yeah, but I mean that was just the thing. I don't think it was such an easy, or it was as natural to just be like, okay, well, let's just make Wolfenstein episodes for the next 20 years. The Doom felt a little bit more like, okay, so what else can we do with this formula? Like, how can we evolve it a little bit? And then you saw the same thing with Quake a few years later.
Right.
So I think it's interesting now that all of those things have kind of continued. I don't know about where Quake is at this point, but like they continue to make Wolfenstein games and various spin-offs, and get the occasional new Doom game every few years. So
Doom has been quite a phenomenon, I think, over the last couple of years. Was there 2 games?
I guess it's been longer than I thought since the second one came out, but
very enthusiastically received.
Yeah, the remake or reboot or whatever was very good, very popular. So, well, now I have no excuse not to move on to whatever the next Wolfenstein game is. I don't even know what's next in line at this point. I don't know if it's like there was Castle Wolfenstein. There were so many. I've lost track. I've always been kind of curious, so maybe I'll check it out next year.
Nice. Cool. Well, that's fun. I wasn't sure that was going to go. The further back we go with video games, the harder I think it is to sort of approach some of these. So,
yeah,
it's cool that it's still pretty consumable.
Yeah, no, it was a very pleasant surprise.
I've been playing. What have I been playing? I've been playing Resident Evil Biohazard.
Yeah, Resident Evil 7 for everybody who's just sticking to the numbers.
Right. This game is gross. It is just the gooeyest, slimiest, like skeeviest I've felt playing a video game in a long time.
I think so. There are a lot of factors that make me like not really interested in playing this, but that is that may be the largest factor. I'm just like, I don't want to spend any time in this gross looking house. It just like looks very unpleasant.
Well, let me tell you, you'll spend all of your time in this gross looking house. I'm not going to do spoilers. I don't think this counts as a spoiler, but the entire game is this house.
Isn't there like I don't know how much, have you played the whole thing? No,
I think I'm super close. I was desperate to finish it before we recorded, but
really?
I'm not done yet. But I think I'm there.
Okay, I was going to say something.
To get some of the payoff.
I don't want to spoil stuff for you if you're not done with it yet. But so I'll forget it. I'll hold on to that.
Okay.
Anyway, so you're in this gross house.
Yes.
It's really disgusting.
which is similar to the very first Resident Evil, where you spend the entire game in pretty much a single location, right? You're in a big giant mansion. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, cool. This is kind of an interesting kind of inversion of the first Resident Evil. This is
almost
not
like a nice mansion, though.
Yeah, this is not that. This is So this is a giant like compound essentially in Louisiana, and the hook here is that your girlfriend has gone missing. Has been missing for 3 years when you mysteriously, out of the blue, 3 years, you get a message from her. You get a voicemail from her with some clues that lead you out to this house. So the game starts with you kind of parking your car and wandering into the bayou and finding this giant, dilapidated, rundown, filthy looking house out in the middle of the woods. And as you do in video games, you break in and find yourself trapped there by this hideous family. Every member of this, I don't know what the right sort of way to reference it is. Hillbilly is the first thing that comes to mind, but I'm not sure politically where the use of that word is these days. Mm-hmm. Seems quite derogatory, but there's really no other way to sort of describe it. I think elegantly, they are very much kind of woods people. They are very much, just lots of screeching and howling and yelling at each other, and trying very, very hard to kill you every opportunity that they get. While you piece together what happened to your girlfriend, and is she trapped somewhere in this horrible house, and somebody keeps calling you on the phone and giving you hints, and who is that person? And a number of other mysterious things that happen, none of which feel like a Resident Evil game. Okay. So that is kind of the interesting pivot here too. I keep waiting. I keep like, all right, so when does it start? When does the crazy Resident Evil bullshit happen? And
what specifically you feel is missing? Is it the zombies? Is it like, are there green herbs scattered around?
So you get some of that stuff. You get green herbs, and you can combine the green herbs with the chem pack to make a healing kit. So there's still some of the clumsy Resident Evil fusions and crafting that come from, I guess, some of the more modern games, right? Or is that there all along?
They've always had sort of the herb mixing. They've gotten a little more into like a full crafting system with the more recent stuff, I think.
So as you're exploring the house, you find news articles and newspapers and stuff like that reference things happening in Raccoon City. There are things that reference Resident Evil 2 pretty specifically in the news and in books that you find and stuff like that. So if you've played that game, you get some of those like, oh, I remember that. That was interesting. If not, it's just kind of window dressing. But I don't know. I think my modern association with where Resident Evil games are big flashy set pieces. You have a machine gun through the whole thing.
No, come on.
They're not scary. I don't think a Resident Evil game has been scary for quite a while. And they're noisy, and this is not that kind of game mostly. It does have kind of big encounters with kind of bosses, which feel a little kind of shoehorned in and kind of goofy, but feel kind of on brand for Resident Evil. But for the most part, the game really only has kind of 4 or 5 kind of main villains, the members of this family. And there are big sections of this house that they essentially kind of stalk you through. And your first kind of tool for survival is just hiding a lot of times. It's just run as fast as you can, find something to hide under or behind, and try to sort of sniff out what their patrol route is so that you can get by them or get around them or get away from them. You don't have a ton of tools to fight back. When you have them, they're quite limited, even on kind of easy mode. You're not drowning in ammunition when you have it, and your guns really don't do a ton of damage against them anyways, for reasons the game gets into. So you're better off just trying to keep your head down and sneak around and kind of figure out what the hell happened to my girlfriend and how do I get out of this horrible house. So it feels more like man, I kept getting flashbacks to like Soma or Amnesia, or even I think the closest comparison is Alien Isolation, which again, the game only had really one villain in it, and you spent most of the game hiding in a cabinet, hoping it didn't find you. And I feel like Resident Evil Biohazard is a lot of that. Is a lot of me kind of like sneaking into a room going, oh shit, there's that guy. And I hide behind something until he passes. And then I hopefully sneak past him. He's very astute at finding me. He chases you with a shovel, and et cetera, et cetera. And then, you get to another corner of the giant compound, and that's kind of his wife's, the matriarch of the family. That's her corner of the house, and she will stalk you through it. And there's a horrible son that he gets a section, and you get a little bit of his story, and he will try to find you and torture you and stuff like that. So it's it is kind of interesting how it's sort of segmented out. It's interesting in that you spend a lot of your time hiding, which is not something I generally associate with Resident Evil games. Mm-hmm. And there's none of the, you don't have a machine gun. Eventually you can get a machine gun if you want one.
Okay, hold on. So you keep talking about this machine gun thing.
Yep.
I feel like the machine gun is really only in like the last couple hours of every Resident Evil game. Like, yes, eventually you do get a machine gun. But in those early Resident Evil games especially, I remember just spending a lot of the time having to run away from zombies or like really be careful about who you pick a fight with, just because you weren't drowning in bullets in those early ones.
Okay, I'll give you that. Absolutely. I'm thinking of my experiences with 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've only played 5 and 6, which were not good Resident Evil games, you did have a machine gun most of the time in those games. 4, well, it didn't quite get as extreme as 5 and 6, but it's definitely more action focused than the earlier
I've never
ones.
finished 4, so I'll default to you, which I know you've played it multiple times.
Yeah. But yeah, so everything I've seen from this, I haven't actually played Biohazard, felt like they took a lot of cues from Amnesia, because that was such a breakout hit. And it felt sort of like a new direction for horror games after Resident Evil had kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
Yeah. But it's interesting to sort of see like a big budget approach to something like that. The segments of the game that I really like actually are the ones where in the course of the game you'll find a videotape, and then eventually you have to find a VCR to put it into and a shitty little TV. And your perspective shifts from Ethan, the protagonist of this thing, who is kind of a blank slate. He doesn't really say a lot. He's kind of just a dude. I gotta find my girlfriend. And that's kind of the character he has. But when you put the tape in, you play as the person on the tape. And you get a little bit of their story and how they came to be in the house and what they were trying to do to escape and stuff like that. So that's really fun because it shifts up the perspective a little bit. You get like a little puzzle box almost inside every videotape, a survival themed puzzle you have to get through. Which is cool. And yeah, I think it's just interesting to kind of like shift the person that you play as. So I like those. Anytime I found a videotape in the game, I was like, cool, let's do this. And there's a handful of them so far. So it's definitely one of the kind of like the components of the game that pops up periodically. Yeah, there's no like, at least thus far, there's no big like umbrella conspiracy yet. There's not a lot of like, the stars, the Raccoon City cops and stuff like that never show up and try to kick down the door. There's like a local police officer that you interact with briefly in the beginning. And that's about it. I kept waiting for him to like, oh, it's Wesker or not, but it's nothing like that. Like, I keep trying to sort of figure out like, how is this connected? How does this fit in? Because I keep waiting for it to turn into a Resident Evil game at some point. But it is, if it's there, it's not overt, or if it's there, it only happens in the last hour of the game. Because like I said, I think I'm pretty close. And it's not beating me over the head with kind of what I feel like are kind of the failures of modern Resident Evil games. It really feels like someone made a very calculated and clear choice to just avoid all of that as much as possible. And while I suspect that might sort of rub some big Resident Evil fans the wrong way, to me it feels like, holy cow, this is really cool. This really feels like kind of a bold reimagining of what you can do with Resident Evil. In fact, it almost kind of barely feels like a Resident Evil game.
Yeah, I'm really impressed that they were like, this is what they ended up doing. Like
it's a huge detour.
Resident Evil 6, I think they needed to course correct pretty significantly. So it seems like they did that, which is cool.
Yeah.
It feels almost like kind of like Final Fantasy style a bit, where it's just like, oh, well, all those other games, that was then, let's see what we can do now. Like, what does a modern Resident Evil game look like?
Yeah.
So I'm impressed that they took it this far away from the formula.
Yeah, I'm impressed with it too. I kind of wasn't expecting to like this.
Oh, so you're into it.
I'm into it. I'm feeling it. Yeah.
Okay.
It is scary. It is genuinely scary quite a bit. It is gross though. So back to that. Yeah, this house is in quite a state. This family lives in filth. There is a scene at one point where you wake up after being comatose at like a feast, and it is just the most disgusting thing.
Oh yeah,
it is.
Yeah, it looks terrible.
It is gruesome. At some point, you open a refrigerator because there's an A prompt on it, and I'm like, oh, what's in the fridge? Is it going to be a monster?
Yeah,
and no, like a dummy, I like lift the latch and open the refrigerator door, and it's just like ooze. It's just like spider webs and sticky things and black filth inside shimmering, and I'm like, why did I do that? That's a mistake. So I think there is a really good like haunted house kind of window dressing to this thing. There's a sequence where you go in a basement and the basement is flooded, and it does require you to like hold your breath to dunk under a beam.
Oh, don't go under. No.
Sticking your like face in this filthy water at the bottom of the house. And I'm like, I need to take a shower after this game.
Ethan.
So again,
come on.
Kudos to these developers for really just going super hard on being just the slimiest, filthiest, gross out horror scenario thing you can kind of cook up for a video game. Yeah, I like it. I think they're doing what they're trying to do, and I give them credit for it.
Yeah.
Some of the characters are a little goofy. Some of the dialogue's a little off. Sarah was watching me play it at some point. A little off. It like they talk like people don't necessarily normally talk to each other. There's way too much exposition. So
they talk like they're in a Resident Evil game.
They talk like they're in a Resident Evil game. Very explainy. At one point, Sarah said, "This would be much scarier if she would shut up."
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely. Could have probably used a little more editing, but I'm impressed by what this is, particularly given the expectations I had coming out of my more recent experiences with Resident Evil games. It's cool. It seems very focused. It seems like they're kind of embracing the survival horror thing again. And it seems like it's a game made by people who have played modern horror games and are kind of doing their very best kind of interpretation of how that would live in a Resident Evil universe.
Yeah. Man, I don't know if like Capcom was in a slump for a while. Like certainly Resident Evil 5 and 6 were questionable. And maybe there's some other weird stuff going on with like some of their other franchises. But like they've been on a real hot streak for the last, like when did this come out? 5, 6 years ago. This was
actually January 2017. This was like 2 or 3 months before Breath of the Wild came out.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I just feel like, they've just been nailing it since probably around this. Like, this was pretty well regarded. And since then, they did Village. Village was like, I don't know if it was as well regarded as Biohazard, but then there was like the 2 and 4 remakes. They just like Street Fighter 6 is super popular.
Who was the giant vampire priestess in Village that was an internet phenomena in Dimitrescu, Lady Dimitrescu?
Yeah, kind of the unexpected breakout star of that game. I think I'd be more likely to play Village than Biohazard. I mean, first of all, it just looks less gross. But I really like that.
You're in a cool castle. It's fairly clean.
Yeah, I mean, it still looks very scary. I watch people stream a lot of that game. And there are definitely segments where I'd just be like, okay, no, on second thought, no, I'm not going to play that game. It's a little too much going on. But I like that it seemed like they really sort of upped the level of sort of camp with like the vampire lady. And then there's the guy who he like has all the machines or whatever. It just feels a little more B-movie than Biohazard. Resident Evil 7. God, just put numbers on them so I can keep track. I don't know how well that went over with people who are who are fans of 7, but it did feel like, a slight turn back towards like classic Resident Evil. I'll be very interested to hear what you think of it when you get there eventually.
Yeah, I don't know, because this is working for me. Like I like I said, I keep waiting for it to turn into, and I'm being a smartass when I say things like this, but I keep waiting for it to turn into a crappy Resident Evil game. And I'm afraid that as this sort of bold new imagining of Resident Evil sort of gets further in the tooth, that it will just sort of morph back into what it was before. So I hope there is someone kind of keeping them on a path. I want, cool. If they're going to embrace campy, that's awesome. This definitely is sort of embracing like an 80s horror movie vibe in a way that kind of feels fun to me, a child of 80s horror movies. It's also a lot of like body horror in it. There's a lot of like things in you, things under your skin, like parts of you coming off and stuff like that. And here's kind of a cool take, is that this is the first Resident Evil that's first person. It's not a third person shooter. So that is a different way of sort of approaching Resident Evil 2, I think.
Yeah.
And that does make it feel like you have kind of like an interesting bodily perspective. Like when you check your inventory, you kind of hold up your wrist and look at your watch and stuff like that. When you defend yourself, it's you holding kind of your two hands up in front of you, and you can kind of see that your hands are all like battle scarred and your sleeves are all ripped up and stuff. And so it's definitely kind of a Resident Evil like in the VR age. I think there was a VR version of this, was there not?
Yeah, there was.
I can only imagine how horrifying that experience might be. But it's cool. I really am surprised by how much I'm enjoying it.
Cool. Oh, well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Man, I think there's definitely some stuff that I've seen in 8 that I think you'll not enjoy, but there's also stuff that feels like sort of all-time peak Resident Evil, or like not just Resident Evil, but just like horror video gaming. So very curious to see what you think about that eventually. Yeah. But it's cool that you're into Village so far.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just going to wait until some modder releases, like, what would it be? Like Resident Evil Village. What's the mode in all the Assassin's Creed games now? Just like the historical tour mode. Just give me the mode where you walk around the house. They've called like some cleaning service to tidy everything up, and you can be like, oh, this is where Resident Evil 7 took place. This is the actual house that they filmed it all in. This is where, the guy chased down Ethan with a chainsaw or whatever. And I'll just be like, oh, it's very interesting.
And they just digital blur everything in the refrigerator, everything on the buffet table. Yeah. Someone's gone in with a wet vac and cleaned up that space underneath the house.
Exactly. Because there's just like there's so much in it working against it for me at this point. I'm just like, I don't really know. I mean, this is definitely not the type of game that I would play, but I'm sort of curious, just as somebody who has played most of the other Resident Evils, to see how it connects back into everything. Yeah.
I'm curious too, but it's sort of cautious trepidation. I think like I don't know how this ends or where it ends because I haven't quite gotten there yet, but I hope they stick the landing. I really kind of want an exciting payoff. And yeah, I think maybe I would like if it somehow loops back into the world of Resident Evil. But I don't want it to go big. I like that it's kind of small and scary and feels like a haunted house game. I think it works that way. I think if if the military rolls in at the end of this thing, I'm going to be very upset.
It's like, oh, here, you found the rocket launcher or whatever.
Right, yeah, and I have to shoot down a helicopter or something like that. No, that's not what this game is. But there's a place for that. There's a place in gaming for that. It doesn't have to be Resident Evil Biohazard.
Yeah, no. Well, cool.
Yeah. It's a pleasant surprise.
Yeah. All right, well, we finally made it to Resident Evil 7.
We're dragging it into the 21st century here.
I still haven't completely finished Resident Evil 6. That's just like, every once in a while, I'm in the mood for just the stupidest video game ever made. So I'm just like, I'll just load up Resident Evil 6 for a while and shoot some stuff with my machine gun. It'll be great.
Yeah. Was that the one in Africa, or is that 5?
That was 5. Yeah, Resident Evil 6 is all over the place.
Gotcha. I know I've played both of them. I remember very little of them.
Yeah. Maybe better off that way. People keep saying like, oh, so they've remade Resident Evil 1 through 4. What are they going to do with 5 and 6 eventually? I'm just like, well, maybe they could just leave it. Maybe we should just forget those happened. I think it would be better off that way.
Yeah. Well, like anything in gaming, I think you've sort of like, there's a chart where these things sort of become nostalgic, right? I think if we have to wait just the right amount of time before people start popping up on the internet going, Resident Evil 5 wasn't that bad. I think it's underappreciated.
Nobody is saying that.
We're not there. No,
hopefully,
but there's an arc to these things.
Yeah, no. I don't know. I feel like people are pretty harsh on Resident Evil 5 still. Like, rightfully so. It's like, it's just did not do a lot of things well.
Yeah. I mean, it is surprising to me how like audacious this is with just being scary and grody and gooey and like, there's horror elements and horror is a part of Resident Evil history, but like for this to embrace it in the way that it does, knowing that millions of people are going to play this thing, like sight unseen people play Resident Evil games. We condescend to sort of 5 and 6, rightfully so, but millions of people bought those games and they probably made a small fortune off of them.
6 was like the best-selling Resident Evil game for a very long time.
That's super disappointing.
It's extremely disappointing.
So to pivot from that, why not keep making those games? Because clearly there's an audience for them. To pivot from that into this thing that feels so different and so, I don't know, anti-popular, right? I mean, horror movies are popular. That's not maybe the right way to approach it, but like, they could just make another dumb military shooter with zombies with guns. And did this cool, creepy haunted house thing with only like 5 main characters. And it doesn't feel like the bombast of a Resident Evil game. It's just, it is surprising that anyone rubber stamped this to me. That, Capcom was like, yeah, that's cool. Let's do this completely other thing. Risky though it might be. Yeah, it's cool. I give them a lot of credit for having the cojones to do it.
Yeah. Wish see more developers taking a chance like this. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the same conversation I have every time I play one of the modern Tomb Raider games. It's just sort of like, just stop putting a gun in her hand. Just make a Tomb Raider game that is about exploration and raiding tombs.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That would be amazing. I could do 12 hours of that. I could do 100 hours of that. That sounds super fun. But at some point, it always has to turn into her hiding behind a box shooting at guys. Just have a little, maybe they will. Maybe because, they have new owners, new developers now. Maybe the next wave of Tomb Raider things will be a Brave New World. But just seems very, very unambitious to keep making these over and over again and having her, lining up headshots with her crossbow.
Oh, maybe she'll have a crossbow in the new one. Yeah. Maybe she'll have like big blades that come out of her arms.
Robo Laura.
Yeah, like
anyway, sorry.
Sci-fi Tomb Raider.
I mean, maybe, sure.
Yeah, why not?
What was that dinosaur thing on a spaceship? I mean, anything's possible.
What Dino Crisis?
Dino Crisis. Like, wait, dinosaurs in space?
Yeah. I mean, they weren't always in space. They might have taken it a little too far with that one.
So yeah, where to next? I don't know what I would play next. I've got a few things on the hopper here.
Persona 5?
Probably Persona 5. Yeah.
Persona
5 Strikers. Let's be clear.
Yeah. Up next, I think for me is Alcahest, the weird Japanese action RPG.
Cool.
And once again, I'll be streaming it. Had a good time with the Wolfenstein stream. So tune in. I think it'll be Friday again at 5:30 Pacific. Play a little Outcast. Everybody's favorite.
I don't know what that is. I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't really know much about it either, so it'll be new to everybody.
We do want to encourage our listeners to go to VGHangover.com and get a link to our Discord. You can hang out with us and chat about video games and chat about your own personal backlog. We would love it for you to play along with us. and knock a few games off your backlog list for this summer. We've got quite a few people from our community that are playing along with us this summer. What are folks playing, DJ?
We got some good lists this year. We got, let's see, Resgrino playing a bunch of Resident Evil games from the sound of it. So he's already completed Resident Evil 7 and 8, so he's a little bit ahead of you. But he's got some Wolfenstein on there as well. Wolfenstein The Old Blood. I don't know if is that one of the ones you played?
That is one of the ones I played, yeah.
Okay. And then Resident Evil Revelations 2, which is it's one of the good ones from what I hear.
People like those Revelations games, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do those next. We got always, forging his own path. We got Peters doing backlog consisting of 4 movies he hasn't seen. Sleepless in Seattle, Bruce Almighty, The Thing, and Terminator 2. You haven't seen Terminator 2, you gotta watch that one for sure.
Yeah. You've never seen The Thing? That's, I mean, it's a good list. It doesn't have to be movies, video games, list. I think.
I've never seen Sleepless in Seattle. Maybe I should put that on my list this year.
We can do a spoiler cast with Sleepless in Seattle.
Then finally we have a previous backlog champion, Eshin, sticking to one game this year, apparently, but it's a doozy. He says he wants to complete as much of Final Fantasy XI as possible, as the sort of notoriously old school MMO. So,
oh, wow.
Best of luck with that. I still have not, I've bounced off that one several times. Not made it to the end of that one yet. But, yeah, good luck with that.
Cool. All right. Well, we should wrap this thing up. If you need any more video game hangover in your brain, you can follow us on, do we say X or do we say Twitter?
Nobody says X. It's still Twitter. Let's be realistic. There's one guy saying X. Follow us on Twitter. Twitter.com/VGHangover. You can always go show notes and links and an invite to our Discord at VGHangover.com. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcasting app of choice. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Google Podcasts. We're on YouTube every week. Hit us up, subscribe, like, notification bell, all that other fun stuff, and maybe help us out by telling your friends about the show. Yeah, that'd be great. It helps us get the word out, pick up new listeners. They'll be just in time to join us next week for episode 600. Woo! What's going on for episode 600? I don't know. Do you know? Week 2 of the Backlog Attack. Week 2 of the Backlog. All right, more Resident Evil. Here we go. Just all Resident Evil all the time. You could probably do quite a long podcast or an unbroken series of Resident Evil episodes at this point if you're really committed to it. But anyway, I'm not sure if that's what's going to be happening next week. We want to give thanks again to Fear of Dark for our intro and outro music. You can head over to fearofdark.bandcamp.com to hear more of his work. Maybe buy an album or two. That would be great. All right. Well, we'll be back next week. Until then, this is Randy Dickinson. This is DJ Ross. Thanks so much for listening to Video Game Hangover. Goodbye. Good night. See ya. Mein Leben.